Welcome back to the Unifying Field podcast. It has been far too long, but I'm excited to get back to recording episodes again. And a little nervous, if I'm being honest. My journey since you last heard from me has been a roller coaster for sure. And my life is the best example I have in order to potentially help guide others on their journey, such as yourself. And so today, I think that's where I'm going to get started. And like I said, my journey has been quite the roller coaster, and hopefully it'll be a little bit entertaining and hopefully potentially help you on your own path. But we'll see. My journey has led me to take some big leaps of faith. And one thing I hope to do with this channel is to kind of set myself apart by making things actionable. That's what I originally talked about before was spirituality to me, or being spiritual over being religious would be being spiritual is taking action, implementing these interesting ideas into your life. And so my journey of recent, since you last heard from me, has been a lot of trying to embody the things that I try to teach. I'm learning just like you are. And I've heard that the things that you most need to learn are the things that you are, or rather, you teach best what you most need to learn. Okay. So we'll start with, I guess, from where you last heard from me. So I was working a job for the last 7 years of my life, right? And when you're somewhere that long, you get really comfortable. And when you're comfortable, you don't want to move, even if you know you would be better off, because there's that uncertainty there. Like, I don't know if I'll make it. I've got a little family I've got to support, right? A lot of us can relate to that. Like, especially as the man of the house, you have to provide for your family, you know. So going to a state of insecurity is not, it's tough. It was really tough for me, which is why I stayed there as long as I did. I was extremely unhappy, you know. I used to have this saying a long time ago that I'm most comfortable when I'm uncomfortable. But at this point, I definitely was more comfortable being comfortable. But eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to make a change. You know, that voice became overpowering. And I didn't have a job lined up on the other side. I didn't even know what I was supposed to do. But I decided to take a leap of faith, as I said, and become quiet. And hopefully, this is all theory, That's kind of the fun thing with spirituality. It's easy to say, trust God. But when it comes down to it, that's a lot harder. That's a lot harder than it sounds. So, anyways, I quit. And it was one of the best things I ever did. It wasn't that my job was bad. It was a good job. I mean, it was a steady job, steady paycheck. Working the same schedule every week. Decent schedule. 40 hours a week, working 4 10s, and then 3 days off. But I was stuck financially and I couldn't achieve my goals. Like it was one thing when I was single and I could work as much overtime as I wanted to, and I could be irresponsible with my money and then fix my mistakes later by working a ton of overtime. But I couldn't do that because I had a family. I had a wife that worked the days that I was off. So I was taking care of our kids during that time off. So then adding my family to my insurance and everything, it made it impossible to overcome. It made it impossible to help us get to a more comfortable place financially as a family. And it ended up leading to me making some bad decisions, like getting into some debt as I tried to make or find a way to make additional money. And I also think I was using it as a way of avoiding my problems in the first place. So, anyways, back to what I was talking about. I had this inner turmoil going on within me every day that was like, man, why are you doing this? Like, how can anybody in here do this boring job every single freaking day? Everything's getting more and more expensive out there, and we're just stuck. It's time to do something. So I quit my job, as I said, in order to stop resisting the flow of life. But I knew I needed to make more money to pay off my debt because where I was at, I couldn't do anything. Like I said, I was stuck. So I spent about a month trying to figure out how to listen. I was hoping that God or the universe would communicate with me and help guide me. All these things we talk about, our spirit guides or just God or angels, whatever it is, your higher self, please guide me in the direction I need to go. And amidst that, I started working out and started going out to the woods and hiking and running in the trails and things like that and having a great time, which I used to enjoy going out to the woods and hiking trails and things like that. And I wanted to ground myself. And also, one day out there, I reconnected with my inner child, which was really awesome. That's an important thing we got to do in life. And then life aligned to push me to a drastic change. And that was to work in the oil fields in North Dakota. So that's where I've been since we last talked. And in doing that, I decided to move out of my home and I sold a lot of my stuff and I put the rest in storage. And yeah, I hit the road. 17 or 18 hours later, I make it up to North Dakota. And I think I stopped resisting the flow of life. Or maybe I started resisting it less. I don't know. There's always going to be some resistance, I'm sure. And I wasn't sure how the oil fields were going to be. Um, would I have inner turmoil, working a job where that maybe isn't the best for the environment? I don't know. I guess this was kind of an experiment. I'm just kind of going where I feel guided, you know. And turns out I was much happier up there. Even as we'll get to, there's a lot of problems working in the oil fields. But even with all of that, there wasn't anything inside me telling me that, you got to move, it's time to leave this. It was just peace. I don't know. And that could be from a number of reasons. There's a lot less noise from the busy world I came from. I made a bunch of good friends up there, one of which will be a guest on my show here pretty soon. And, a lot of good old fashioned physical labor. And it's the hardest job I've ever done in my life. If anybody has ever swung a sledgehammer, hammering pipe together, steel pipe together, you know how difficult that is. Then carrying countless tons of steel pipe to and from setting up and tearing down a job. Really hard. Oftentimes, like, it was hard enough on the rigging in and the rigging out that the mind would be saying, I can't do this. Man, I can't do this. I can't physically do this. And you just got to turn your mind off and just keep doing it. Keep taking steps, you know. So it was fun and working with the ego in such a way, pushing yourself. And also, that kind of work really makes you feel like a man. I think I needed that, you know. Like too much of anything can be a bad thing, but I think that was overall a healthy thing. Another benefit of being up there was since I moved out of my home, as long as I worked with that company, we had free housing. And that goes for a lot of companies up there. So that was great. Didn't have to pay for rent or anything like that. While I was up there, just had to work. I also didn't have to drive. So I did my daily meditation on the drive to the pads each day. Because typically you ride with your supervisor. The money was a lot better than what I was making in my job back home. So there was way less stress over finances, and even if it wasn't the most stable source of income, I was still way less stressed than that. So I wouldn't say money can buy happiness, but I would say that making more money has the potential to reduce stress. So there's that. Now, some of the things that I didn't like about the oil fields was, man, there's so much ego running up there and a lot of negativity. It was a very negative place. And it's enough to bring you down, and that's when you're trying to have a spiritual life. That kind of stuff can be toxic, and you do the best you can, but there's only so much you can do. It's definitely not an environment conducive to maintaining a spiritual practice. I mean, you still do, like I said, you can do what you can, but like you're going to be around negative people who talk about a lot of worldly things all the time, about a lot of lower vibration things, which you can imagine. Like oftentimes my spiritual practice was just meditating on my drive to work, which is not the best place to meditate, but when you have to work 12 hours every day, every single day, no days off, and a lot of times, especially towards the end, our job sites were about 2 hours one way to the pad where we worked. And so drive 2 hours, what would we do? We would get up. I think I would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we would leave by like 3:50 in the morning. We'd drive for about 2 hours, get there a little before 6, work until 6, and then drive another 2 hours home. So then we would get home about 8 o'clock, which left about 7 hours of sleep if you went to bed as soon as you got home. But every once in a while you got to do laundry and you got to figure out something for food. So there was a lot of things, you end up getting so tired that you don't eat very well. You eat garbage essentially, which also isn't conducive to a spiritual practice. Let's see. Um, my marriage issues were made worse by being that far apart for long periods of time, which didn't help. And we had a lot of issues with not having someone to watch my dog while I was gone. And that was really hard trying to do a job, 17, 18 hours away. And there was a moment there where I didn't know if I was going to have to get rid of my dog. And that was very heartbreaking in the moment. Thankfully, I didn't have to. And yeah, there's so many painful moments up there. What else? Bugs. Goodness. So when you work in an industry like that, there's a lot of turnover. You get all kinds of people who move in and out of these company houses, and a lot of people who aren't necessarily the cleanest. And so bugs were a big problem out there. And so the housing was free, but also were the bugs, and that was a nightmare in itself. And then, the only way to make great money up there was to work 12 hours every single day with no days off. And so on my first hitch up there, I worked 47 12s before coming home for the first time. And actually, I was trying to work for 60 days, but then we ran out of work and they sent us home early. So then when you leave, or at least for me, living 17, 18 hours away, when gas is $4 a gallon, it costs roughly $700 to go home and then come back to work at the end of your time off. And when you take time off, you don't get paid. So 1 week at home, which was how long I stayed at home the first time, meant I only got half a paycheck the next time I came back to work, which is tough because the only way you make good money is because you're banking on 44 hours minimum overtime every week, plus your per diem and all that stuff. So that's the only way you make good money in the oil field is by working a ton. And then when you leave, you got to move out of your house each time, or when you get back up there, you got to move back in. So what else? This year, during our supposed busy time of the year, we suddenly lost all of our work. So then there became uncertainty about being able to work, and I wanted stability while making good money. which there was a lot of uncertainty with that. And then I also missed my family, which should be pretty obvious. And regardless, I was still way happier than I was, when I worked the steadier job back home. But I felt very much like a nomad, never knowing where I would be living. So then I decided to do something a little different that would allow me to make more money while being home, at least weekly, you know. And so I did the written testing for the CDL for driving a big truck and got set up for CDL school, which I actually start here in a couple of days. And for whatever reason, I keep finding myself in jobs which has me driving, which is kind of annoying because, I'm not doing something cool like driving a race car. But I guess driving a big truck can be cool. I don't know. It doesn't seem so exciting to me, but I am excited about this new opportunity to be able to make decent money anywhere, I guess. At a minimum, it's something that I can do to make decent money until I'm able to make my passion, which would be something like this right here, my primary source of income. And this whole time while I'm out there, I'm contemplating how to continue on with my podcast, what direction I want to take it and all of that kind of stuff. How do I make this happen again? Because like if you're watching this on YouTube, you may notice that I am definitely not in my old spiritual room, which before I had a whole bunch of different statues of various different religious belief systems in the background. But today, I've got what appears to be some Christmas lights behind me, and also a very nice pearl drum set. So, giving up your house comes with its downfalls. But of course, the studio that I'm in is my best friend's drum room. So, I'm very appreciative, very grateful. And I actually think that him and his band are playing a show tonight as I record. So, shout out to My Nightmare. Go check them out if you haven't. They're on Spotify and all the places. So here we are at today's topic, returning home. This topic heavily involves the whole person, not just the spirit. And all the things that I've been talking about up to this point are many things that affected my person along the way. There's a lot of exciting with the uncertainty, but there's a lot of turmoil going on inside as you've kind of just got to let go and let the path unfold and just start walking, and that is terrifying. And so we're working both the planes here. We're working the spiritual and we're working the physical. At least in the beginning, we're heavily working the physical because all these things affect the physical. The spirit is perfectly at peace, but the person is going through some stuff. So, as I've said before, my whole goal of this show is to bring spirit down into this physical life. So hopefully we can heal and grow as a human and do whatever great things we are meant to do in this life. You know, I want to do this. I want to help you do this as well. And so part of my attempt at flowing with the river of life was letting go of those things that helped me stay comfortable and feeling secure, which included, of course, my job, where I was for 7 years, and also letting go of my house, which it was a decent house, like perfectly nice house. My dog had a fenced in yard, I had a garage. It was just fine, but it was still limiting. I still felt like I was resisting. And so I also risked not having a home for the sake of putting my family back together. So with the hope that we would be moving back in together once I was done with the oil field or whatever. Which, who knows how all of that will turn out, but my plan ended up backfiring. Story of my life. And essentially came home to no home. So what a roller coaster. And none of that was meant to try to get you to feel sorry for me. It's just, I'm just using my life as an example. And really, that's all I can do is try to maybe entertain you by showing you my downfalls and where I succeeded, or maybe help you navigate your own journey. Life, I think this is real life for everybody. Like it isn't always crazy. My life has just been crazy because there's been a lot of movement in a short period of time. But ultimately, life ebbs and flows. It's just like waves in the ocean. Sometimes you have good moments, you're going up to the peak of a wave, and then the wave crests, and then now you head down into the trough. It's kind of it's just an up and down thing, and that's just the way life is. And also, of course, in my suffering here, I know a lot of it has to do with my attachments. But I think I'm doing a lot better than I used to be. Like, I think I made a lot of progress along the way. Like, even despite all these hardships, like, I'm a lot more stable these days. Like, the universe surely knows how to rock my world, as I'm sure it can with anybody. But I'm able to regain my center a lot quicker, you know. So, to finish, or to kind of round out my story, if you will, I ended up moving back in with my mom, which is a very ego demoralizing thing, which is actually kind of perfect because one of my episodes on Metamystics, I talked about allowing your ego to die. You know, that's another good way of letting it die. You know, things like letting your ego be wrong. Let somebody be right, and let that help your ego die off. But ultimately, since I'm getting ready to start school, I decided to do that, and thankfully, I'm extremely grateful for that. Um, that I do have somewhere where I can stay. I could get another job in a new apartment, but for now, I'm just focused on getting through school. So that's essentially where I'm at today with my journey. And so in my time off that I've had, since I left the oil fields, I've been using this time of uncertainty by spending time with my kids and family. And I contemplated the idea of not having a stable place I can call home, because here lately I've been moving all over the place. I've even had dreams about it. So that brings us to the topic of today's episode, which is returning home. I had a dream recently where I found myself wearing my old Air Force uniform. And I looked at my arm patches, and sure enough, I'm back at my old staff sergeant rank. I remember thinking, son of a bitch. That's such a terrible time in my life. I was in so much darkness within my mind. And here I was again for some reason. Anyways, I was like, all right, then now what? You know, just like I would be for the most part today, because I don't want to be a part of a war. My beliefs have completely changed since I was in. Like, I don't even recognize that person that I was before. So why am I putting back on that same uniform? But I decided I needed to get a shower. So I gathered my things and I looked for a shower. I struggled to find a shower with adequate privacy. Most shower stalls were missing curtains or had doors that were hanging on the hinges. I found a shower that worked, eventually, and so I gathered my things and came back to finding somebody using it. So I had to look for another one. Essentially, it seems like I was living in the past, which was extremely annoying because I wanted to move forward with life, right? Which could easily relate to certain areas of my life. And it seemed that part of moving forward meant I needed to shower and wash away the old. But at the same time, I couldn't find a place to call my own with adequate privacy. So I kept having to move to the next one. And if everyone in our dreams is me, or if everyone in my dreams is me, then I am the one who is in my way, which I'm sure is the case for most of us, as our biggest obstacles, on our life's journey is ourselves. But when it came to trying to find a shower of my own, I was very nomadic in this dream, which is how I find myself today. So that was interesting. And I thought it was relevant to the idea of returning home because I'm literally dreaming about not having an adequate place of my own. And so I began contemplating the idea of home as I began walking this liminal space in life within uncertainty. Uncertainty about my life, my career, my relationship, and my home. And that would often keep me out of my center. So why am I fixated on this idea of having a home? Is it because it would be mine? Do I find comfort there? Is it that it's my home? It's my home and no one can take it away from me? Is it my safe space? I had a conversation with my brother about life on the road as a truck driver. He's been doing that for a couple of years now. And my brother was the reason I decided to head to the oil field in the first place. And also my inspiration for getting my CDL and driving a big truck. So moving back to my story from earlier, after about a month of asking God or the universe to guide me in the direction to go after quitting my job of 7 years and not having any solution outside of filing bankruptcy because I'm just stuck. And even with my job, I was just stuck. God spoke through my brother and said, dude, go work your ass off in the oil field, North Dakota, and fix your shit. And I listened. Anyways, my brother spends 5 to 6 days a week living inside his big truck. And with his schedule, he spends only about 1 to 2 days per week at his actual home. Okay. And he described his truck as his home away from home, which I mean is obvious. If you're a truck driver and you live on the road, you live in your truck. But it's his safe place where he works. It's where he hangs out. It's where he eats, and it's where he sleeps. And after I'm done with school, my life will look similar as I transition into that field, which it'll also be my spiritual space as well, because I'll meditate within my truck. Though it isn't going to be my true physical home, of course. And along my rabbit hole of contemplating this, I was reminded of when I went to CNA school and we studied Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a great starting point for understanding what home truly represents. And I'll try to add a visual of Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the video, but essentially, it's a 5-layer triangle, kind of like the food pyramid or whatever. But in this case, this is for the order of importance for our basic human needs. So for those of you who can't see, I will read it. So at the very base, you have the largest section, which is the most important. The hierarchy begins at the very bottom, and essentially the next layer up is not as important, or is not that important until the layer below is fulfilled adequately, at least. Maybe not completely fulfilled, but at least adequately. So we start at the base. The most important layer is physiological. So at the very least, we don't want to be hungry, thirsty, exhausted, freezing, overheating, sick, or in pain. Next layer, we have safety. If we feel okay in this exact moment, we then also want to feel safe, confident we can avoid pain, hunger, and other dangers for the immediate future. The third level, we have social. If we feel safe, then our social needs for love and belonging come into play. We feel secure when we're part of a tribe we can trust and unworried about rejection or alienation. The fourth layer is self-esteem. Once we're secure in our social needs, our primal desires for status and self-esteem come into play. We want to feel not only part of the group, but an admired and respected part. And finally, the fifth and the tip of the pyramid or triangle is self-actualization, which says, finally, now our core needs are met, we are ready to pursue our deepest desire for self-actualization, to become the most complete and authentic version of ourselves. With the fundamentals taken care of, we're free to act as we choose, aligned with our values and higher purpose. So as you can tell, when we're focused on our human, or really guiding anybody for that matter, it's as this quote says, as this quote goes, and I don't remember who said it. Maybe it was Maharaji, Ram Dass's guru, but the quote goes, "You can't talk to a hungry person about God. You got to feed them first." Okay. So if we move back down to the physiological and the safety sections of this hierarchy of needs, you realize that these two things are kind of interconnected as far as home goes. So when we have a home, typically we're going to have a job because we got to be able to pay for it. And so that's going to provide our physiological needs to prevent us from being exhausted, freezing, hungry, so on. Having food, obviously, you have a job, you're going to have to pay for a home and for food and that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of lumping those two together because they're kind of interconnected. But for the physical person, we at least have to have these things fulfilled on some level. But at the same time, as I've been experiencing, like these things that help us remain secure are quite transient, just as everything in the physical world is quite transient. And so that really opened my eyes to the idea of impermanence, or merely the illusion of security. So it took me down this other rabbit hole of, security and illusion, which got me thinking about this. If I rent a house or an apartment, I can be kicked out for whatever reason. They can raise the rates of the rent. They can, if I don't pay my rent, they can evict me, and so on and so forth. If I buy a house and I don't make the payments to the bank, they may foreclose on my house and kick me out. Again, more obvious stuff. Just bear with me. If I own my own house without owing any money on it, if I do not pay my property taxes each year, the government will kick me out of the house I allegedly own, right? You know all of this stuff, I'm sure. What about my truck? Somebody could run into me. I could have a wreck. I hope not, but it can happen, and that can take my truck away from me. What about my stuff? We could lose our house in a fire or a flood, or someone could steal your stuff, or you could lose your stuff. Like the other day, I just lost my headphones. My headphones are no longer mine. Everything you call yours leaves you when you pass away. Somebody else gets it, or it gets thrown away. Even your body isn't yours. You merely rent this avatar for a short period of time. What about money? Even if you have a fair amount of money, a serious medical issue can take most of that away. If you have a job, you can be laid off or fired. If you work for yourself, you may lose your reputation, and for whatever reason, may lose your clients. All this can be out of your control. There are no guarantees. Nothing is truly ours. We borrow things, but we don't know how long we'll have it. So I think, these basic needs that we have as a human, on our human side or our ego side, we can't ever count on having all of those things, which is okay. It's just kind of the nature of this plane that we're experiencing. And that's why attachment causes so much suffering, is because everything is so transient. Things are constantly flowing into our lives and constantly flowing out of our lives. And when we become attached to things as they try to leave, we experience pain from that, right? And I won't pretend like I have it bad. Like, I know not having a house of my own at the moment, like, I'm still okay. I'm living with my mom, which again, I'm incredibly grateful for. And I know not everyone would be so lucky in that scenario, but I am. But in this in between space, I contemplated where I truly feel at home. And that wasn't at whatever place I ended up finding myself staying at. It was wherever my family was. And even now, sitting here talking to you, I feel at home because I'm doing my passion, you know? And if I didn't have a physical home to stay, I would have to navigate that. And I'm sure that would come with its own turmoil and everything. But being a spiritual podcast, I'm sure you know where we're heading next. But one other thing before we leave this, before we leave the physical side of things, you know, all this time that I've been away from having a guaranteed paycheck all the time, to where I've allowed for change and growth and to try to walk a little bit more aligned with my path, I still feel way more secure and at home in a situation that looks so much less secure on the outside. Maybe it's like if you start practicing trusting that you will be taken care of, maybe that takes away from a little bit of the insecurity. I don't know. But I do know that I do trust that the river of life knows where it is going. Even if I don't, I can see only a little bit at a time. Now, some of you may know that Ram Dass has heavily influenced my eclectic spiritual nature. And I thought of a great segment from one of his talks that will help me transition from the external understanding of returning home to the internal. Ram Dass found himself a little homesick after traveling the country, giving talks, and he said, "One day I was sitting in a motel in middle America, one of those plastic Holiday Inn type places. I went into my room, sat down, and set up my little puja table, moved the menu and all that stuff. And it was kind of depressing. I thought, well, a few more weeks and I'll be done with this tour and I can go home. But then I saw the pain that thought created in me. I got up, walked out of the room, closed the door, walked down the hall, turned around, came back, unlocked the door, and yelled, 'I'm home.' I came in, sat down, and looked around, and I thought, Well, I wouldn't have decorated this way particularly, but what the hell? If I'm not at home in the universe, boy, I got a problem. What is home? Home is where your heart is. Home is the quality of presence. It's the quality of being wherever you are. That was Ram Dass from one of his many great talks. You might have picked up a Joe Dirt quote in there. Home is where the heart is. And so this train of thought led me to remembering another one of my favorite teachers, the late and awesome Thich Nhat Hanh. Of the many things he is well known for, he taught something called walking meditation. And walking meditation is interesting because it involves movement, as if you're moving to a destination. But the real goal of walking meditation isn't the final destination. It is arriving with each step. You think, in each step, I arrive. You feel the ground beneath your feet as your foot slowly molds around the texture of the dirt and the rocks. Then you slowly take another step. And in each step, you arrive. You might say, where do you arrive to? I'm glad you asked. Home. You arrive home. And as you may have guessed at this point, our true home is the present moment. The present moment cannot be taken away from us. The present moment is ever with us, wherever we are. And it almost makes me wonder if the present moment and God are one and the same. Because why not? If God is all there is, just like the present moment, then why not? So, anyways, for some of you, returning to the present moment may seem super simple, and it may be that way for most of you. But especially in times of uncertainty and turmoil, simplicity is our best friend. Like, I know everything I've been going through, and really just oftentimes on my journey, my favorite thing to do is not do anything complicated. Like, always make sure that you're able to return to the present moment. If you can do nothing else, do the basics. Because as I often felt, which I'm still navigating this and introducing other methods of mindful practice, such as Tai Chi, I'm learning that some days are downright or feel downright impossible to both sit still enough to meditate and also to do anything at all, which is weird because if you don't feel like doing anything at all, you should be able to sit still, right? No. I mean, you can, and I do, but that doesn't mean it's the most effective at bringing me to the present moment. But other methods that incorporate slow movement, such as Tai Chi, I'm sure there's other things out there, but that's just what I'm experimenting with right now. Provide alternative methods for achieving the same goal and moving energy too. So even if we don't have a dedicated spiritual space or even four walls around us, to feel safe and secure, we still have everything we need to arrive home wherever we are. And I think the real benefit of mastering the simple idea of returning home to the present moment is the ability to not be rocked so hard by the waves of the storms that life brings us. Because it's inevitable that life is going to flow up and down, up and down. But we don't have to truly ride the waves. Like within the present moment, we can maintain at least a minimum sense of equanimity. So I want to end this episode by inviting you to return home with me by doing a simple meditation with me by the late Thich Nhat Hanh. If it is safe, I would like you to bring your attention to your breath. If you're not doing anything, then you can close your eyes and follow along. I want you to begin by breathing in and out slowly through your nose. And as you breathe in, I want you to think, I know I am breathing in. And as you breathe out, think, I know I am breathing out. Now, as you breathe in, think, I notice my in-breath has become deeper. And as you breathe out, think, I notice that my out-breath has become slower. Next, breathing in, I calm myself. Breathing out, I feel at ease. Breathing in, I smile. Breathing out, I release. Breathing in, I dwell in the present moment. Breathing out, I feel it is a wonderful moment. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Unifying Field podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more content. Thank you, everyone.